Well, are you as afraid as I am of Glastonbury being over finally? I know that will be a sad and bitter day for me, but we're not there yet. He was too wise to present himself ere Sam had washed, changed his clothes, and made tea, but he had timed these proceedings to such a nicety that it was pretty well almost always just as Sam was lifting his first to his lips that Jimmy knocked at his door. This is Jimmy Bag, a semi-imbecile beggar we're talking about. Sam accepted this situation as if it were his destiny to spend his life with Jimmy, as indeed perhaps it was, but he displayed one small weakness on all these occasions, which betrayed the differences between an Anglo-Saxon holy man and one of Latin or Oriental blood. For he gave up his one chair to his visitor, and himself sat down on his camp bed, not, it must be confessed, out of politeness, but with an irresistible awareness of the verminous condition of the beggar's filthy clothes. It was on the occasion of the fifth visit of Jimmy Bag to the malt house loft floor that the obstinate imbecile suggested, after many wavering circumlocutions, that Sam should accompany him to his home beneath the Evercreech Railway bank. It was a lovely evening when the two men set out together with this purpose in view, and Sam could not help thinking, as he walked along by his new friend's side, of a certain curious change that had taken place in his recent responses to the visible world. The back gardens of Northload Street sloped down into a region of desolate and forlorn litter, where these warm and mellow brick tiles, for which Glastonbury is famous, gave place to an older style of roofing, of dull gray, moss-patched slate. As he glanced about him, he felt a slight touch again of this new sensation he had been receiving lately. What he felt was a strange and singular reciprocity between his soul and every little fragment of masonry, of stony ground, of mossy ground, of woodwork, of trodden mud, of clumps of last year's dusty nettles, of withered dock leaves, or mildewed palings. It is true that to the intellectual eyes of Oriental spirituality, or of Latin devotion, Sam's attempts at living the ideal life would have seemed like those of an ascetic schoolmaster or priggish Boy Scout, childish, and lacking in maturity, dignity, subtlety, and intellectual passion. Sam's whole system of moral values, his puritanical stress upon sexual restraint, his fidgety preoccupation with isolated acts of benevolence, would have seemed to a Celtic or Latin nature a form of tiresome and Pharisaic fussiness, more akin to the pragmatic virtue of some modern lay brother than to the sublime heroism of real medieval sanctity. Nevertheless, to the invisible observers of the magic-charged atmosphere of Glastonbury, this resolute and sturdy descendant of Somersetshire yeomen displayed a certain humble simplicity and a certain stolid, good-humored piety that rendered many more picturesque struggles to live the sanitary life appear trickily theatrical and even self-deceiving in comparison. And certainly on the particular evenings as he adapted his pace to the shuffling and shambling gait of Jimmy Bag, Sam began to be aware that some subtle barrier between his inmost being and certain particular objects in nature had begun to give way. The truth was that, without being in the least conscious of the importance of humanity, of the physical law he had blundered upon, or of its rarity in the world, Sam had found out that when a person is liberated from possessiveness, from ambition, from the exigencies of desire, from domestic claims, from every sort of authority over others, he can enjoy sideways and incidentally as he follows any sort of labor or quest, the most exquisite trances of absorption into the mysterious essences of any patch of earth mold, or any fragment of gravel, or any slab of paving stone, or any tangle of weeds, or any lump of turf that he may come upon as he goes along. There is always a peculiar pleasure in arriving suddenly through a narrow aperture between masses of masonry at some wide-open expanse, and this is especially the case in the evening twilight, and when such an expanse opens out towards the west. The misty glow, filtering through the smoldering ditch vapors of this open ground, as Sam saw it tonight, lifted into a grandiose and dusky importance every pigsty, every stickhouse, every pigeon tower, every hovel roof, and under a stone arch where the muddy path they followed dived between the railway Sam could see, as they approached the dwellings of Jimmy's aged parents, a great semi-red cirque, like a huge blood-stained mushroom, which was the setting sun. His father's arch-enemy was too close upon his own desolation over the rim of the planet to throw out any magnetic power, whether good or bad. But to see him like this at all, as Sam descended upon the ramparted grayness of the gap in North Lode Street, saw that crimson half-circle, was as if a person saw the stinking head of some titanic invader retreating from a threatened city. Such is the human mind, or at least such is the mind of a son of Summershire clay fumbling towards a holy life, that Sam's consciousness gave a momentary harborage to the unsanctified thought that he was glad that his present companion's rags had not touched his camp bed. But, like a black fly that lodges for a second upon the shaft of a moving wagon, this thought was quickly lost in the outstretched solemnity of the evening scene. "Father be a turble stark man for a bedrid," remarked Jimmy Begg. "I do eat and drink, father do, all there be, where there be any. Mum be a thinned-out ghosty, compared with he." The imbecile paused for a moment and looked at the crimson half-sun as if it went down under the moss-wet stone arch, the walls of which seemed to drip with a moisture that was neither rain nor dew, but rather some malady sweat of its own private enduring. "Mum do sarve he for no think, and it be a pity to see such sarvice. He do lie and eat, and here do wear yourself to bone feeding he. I be afeard of he, just as mum be, but Finn Toller, what be mum's nephy, bain't feared of he. Mum do send I do fetch Finn Toller, and when father do ze uncoming oop path through chinka windy, I do beller and holler, awful for to hear. I do say, thick Godfin be come to murder I, and I do hide hisself under blanket." He doesn't sound too much like an imbecile to me. "Does your mother let Mr. Toller come in?" asked Sam. Jimmy's countenance, which was as a rule as empty of intelligence as a washed-out signboard, emitted at that point a pallid ray of cunning, as if the wind-blown reflection of a streak of moonlight, caught in a rain-tub, had been tossed upward upon that board. "Mum do all is zay the same, she do zay. These poor uncle be starvin', Codfin. Have he go a bite of summit for the day?" "And what does Mr. Toller do then?" "I do empty his pocket wallet of father's bed, and sometimes there be a girt hunk of sweet cheddar on it. But I never sits down for more'n a minute. I must be moving on, Auntie, I says. And then I says to Mum, looking at father, what's head be hid under blanket. I've a just come for sudden wound account, and I be pondering in me mind about settling another. I be a grand settler of accounts, Auntie, he says. And I looks, with his whippy eyes, at father's blanket, till bed do creak, father do shake so. Once seated in that forlorn stone edifice, built long ago under the railroad bank, it came over Sam with a weight like that of the first shovelful of earth thrown into an open grave. What kind of mental aura is projected in a given locality by experience of sheer physical wants? Preparations had evidently been made for what in the bag menage passed for supper. For every object in that miserable room, the walls of bare stone, were patches of soot and grease and indecipherable and nameless stains altered with greenish mold and oozing damp. The small smoky wood fire under a great iron pot, where streamed the most watery concoction ever wrung from twice boiled bones of a skinny rabbit, bare wooden chairs with their seats full of holes, a broken watery jug, and the smoke-darkened chimney-piece, seemed to be grouped themselves around a piece of newspaper laid flat upon the table on which rested the half of a loaf and 2 small salted herrings. Make me hungry, actually. A strong, bony face, angular as the face of a half-starved, overworked horse, did Mrs. Bagg turn towards the visitor while she settled herself on a wooden stool by the hearth and watched his movements as a hungry fieldfare, that bird of wintry bane, might sit with ruffled feathers watching an absent-minded tramp in the road hedge. Her identity, too, like that of the damp walls and the rickety chairs and the innutritious liquid in the black pot and the broken jug in the chimney-piece, seemed, even while she gazed at Sam, to yearn towards the half-loaf and the 2 small fishes upon the outstretched newspaper. And as for the figure in the bed under the patched blanket, the figure of the bedridden Thomas Bagg, its woebegone, rapacious eyes seemed to point out at these objects with the irreversible necessity of a compass needle pointing to the north. Sam couldn't bear to think he was keeping them from this wretched meal, such as it was, but he, too, seemed to succumb to the hypnotic influence of the half-loaf on the table. For nearly a quarter of an hour he murmured various broken comments upon the new Glastonbury government and the chances it offered of monetary advantage to the destitute. The woman's interruptions were, however, entirely irrelevant to what he was saying. They seemed more like the feeble echoes of the mechanical chatter of a gypsy at a fair, and they kept referring to him as the sweet, lovely gentleman what be minded to make our Jimmy's fortune. Once she jumped up from her stool and with a billet of wood snatched from the floor, killed a large bug upon the sooty wall. But the piece of wood, as she threw it down, and her stool, as she took her seat again, and another bug observed by Sam that had escaped her gesture, all these things seemed to his mind to be focused upon that half loaf and those wretched herrings. I'll leave it there at supper time. Till next time, Yes, I had a drink the whole time. I just didn't drink from it. I'll see you in Glastonbury. Cheers.